I know it, I'm like, if you're spelled it wrong,
Right.
the problems of my animal needs. There's so much.
Well, they're doing it's not anything that's like mandatory or pressure.
Like, they're like, we're already doing it.
I've also tapped out.
But my attendance stand electronically.
Keeping track of.
I agree. Hi, Gary. Hi, Martine. Can you hear us now?
Hi, this is Gary. I hear you.
Hello there. I can hear you.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll call roll quickly. Anika Montgomery is not here. Charles McCullough.
Present.
David Smith.
Present.
Gary Dean.
Present virtually.
Mr. Dean is present virtually from Nashville, Tennessee, pursuant to our electronics meeting policy. Jim Miller.
Present.
Julie Evans, present. Lisa Ortiz. Here. Martine Enes-Osario.
Present virtually.
Mr. Enes-Osario is present virtually from Arlington, Virginia, pursuant to our electronics meetings policy. So with that, we'll get started.
All right, so this is ACPD's conclusion to this section of training overall. So we hope that we can kind of bring some of this all together today for how we conduct investigations and how we go through the process of when the public complaint occurs. And what we have prepared specifically, and I just want to make sure that we're all fully aware that the videos that you're going to see for this training, they were training videos designed for events like this. We use these videos part of our supervisors training. And so none of the events are true. Get my whole Law and Order disclosure.
Done.
So if it's any storyline that may seem familiar, it's by mere accident. So just want to make sure that's clear first. And then the second point is for the purposes of this training, there is explicit language used in one of the videos, but it's pertinent to the investigation to get down that road, okay? Which is, we use this one specifically because it would be something that would come from the community. Copy. All right, so the very first one, we're just going to view the complaint real quick.
Separate it out. Just get this out. Just do the complaint, I guess, first.
Thank you.
Ryan, you are up.
It's very similar, typical of what we get in email from the citizens from to our internal affairs email box.
No. We'll get you. Can we get it?
Martine or Gary, can you tell me if you can see the complaint on your screen so you have it?
Not currently.
Yeah, I'm the same. I have it now. Gary has it
I can
now.
see it now.
Awesome. Okay.
All right, I'm gonna pass the invest. All right, so this is typical of an email message we get from a citizen, either to our ACPD internal affairs inbox or the complaint form online, which dumps right into our internal system, and they can enter all their contact information there. Again, reading through this email, important for us to see that we have good contact information, so we can reach out to them and make them aware that we received a complaint. We immediately start looking and determine if we can find, what is there a policy violation, or what can be fixed immediately. Sometimes there's an immediate fix and response we can do, and sometimes there's going to be an investigation we're going to have to spin up and take some time. So as we go through this, tell me a couple things that you see in there to point out that you may think is problematic.
Well, the basic complaint is that the victim of a hit and run spoke to an officer who said, just report it online.
Right.
Investigate.
Yep, correct. So that's a problem, right? So it's a clue for us right away. All right, we responded, we made contact in person with the citizen. Now we're telling them to go online and do something. So there's a disconnect there. Were we wrong, or was the information that they provided, maybe it belonged online? Maybe that was the right place, maybe it wasn't, right? So we have to keep that in mind as we progress forward, both sides, until we kind of gather the evidence and dig into what we got. So we'll take this information and then we'll begin our kind of evidence gathering. We reach out as wide as we can and just start pulling reports, information, timelines to capture everything we can to really start finding, kind of fact finding and see how we're going to progress. What we're going to play for you is a body cam video footage of the officer responding to the citizen. That's Mr. Steven, who sent that email, and you can see their interaction, what they spoke about. So keep some of those facts in mind that is in that complaint versus what's given to you. As the video is playing, I'm going to pass this out. I just asked you shove it under your email. Don't look at it yet, but it'll be there for your reference. Okay?
So as we go through this video, I just want to say that one of the big things that you learned in body-worn camera in the midst of this is the buffering time, right? So this is the time before the actual body-worn camera is actually activated. So as a reminder there.
All right, see some head shaking out there. What do you got? What do you got to say? What do you think?
I think you covered a lot of it right there. And he said a detective was gonna follow up.
Okay,
Doesn't look really that improper to me.
okay.
Well, I wasn't raising my hand, but did a detective follow up?
All right, valid question, right? It's something that we got to look at depending on the timeline. If something was submitted, was that online report submitted, detective? But, so I'll pause for a second because this is where our office is obviously very knowledgeable of their policy and what's reportable. We'll start with the state guidelines of reportable accidents. If there's a motor vehicle accident, it's a hit and run, damage is over $1,500. You see the picture of that car? It's over $1,500. Subject's injured. Gentleman's claiming he's injured, took himself to the hospital, right? That's a reportable accident in the state of Virginia. Virginia State Police requires an accident report. So that needs to be done. Submitting an online report doesn't do that. The second part is our policy, the hit and run crash. Same thing, where there's $1,500 more damage, there's an injury, and really, really key here is solvability factors. What kind of things did he say that we could use to solve this?
Toyota Camry,
Toyota-
description of the driver, partial plate.
All of these things, right? Really good pertinent information that he told the officer, right? So now we have a lot we can take in a report and we can go on. Completely different from that is if the officer shows up and he's like, yeah, I came out of my car this morning, somebody hit it, dented the bumper there. I don't know who did it. There's no tag, there's no cameras, no witnesses, zero solvability. That would be something we could direct them to an online report for a hit and run accident, right? Yeah.
So is the assumption here that the officers didn't do anything else? Like, I kind of assumed that, I mean, they were taking notes or doing something, but is the assumption like they just got on their motorcycle and rode away? Do anything?
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna let you flip over, start looking through that investigation that I provided with you. Take some notes, I'll give you a few minutes to look at that. And we'll go through that and I'll walk you through the steps of how we kind of got from the beginning and then to the end.
Gary or Martine, you can tell me when you want me to move up so you can continue to see the documents.
Could you move up a
Yeah,
little?
I'll let Martine. Yeah, go ahead, Martine, I'll let you, I'll just stick with you.
Is that the whole thing?
Oh, no. I'll keep rolling.
Thank you.
Martina and Gary, I'm going to continue to the last page, which has the recommendation on it.
All right, so.
Oh, what's the contact card?
I'm sorry?
What's the contact card?
So in our levels of progressive corrective action, we have shift level counseling. We have as a lower level, and what that means is that the supervisor will meet with the person, and there is a informal letter that's put in their file just informing the person of what the violation was, keeping record of the date, as well as is attached to the investigation. So it does go against their record, but it's not something that would impact, that's not a gross impact. And that level is not considered disciplinary. And I think we discussed this previously maybe. The next level up from there is a letter of corrective action. Letter of corrective action is a formal letter from the chief advising of the misconduct or the violation of policy, and it warrants that any further disciplinary action, it would then increase further in the order of progressiveness. Then the next one level is a letter of disciplinary action, which is discipline, and that would include anywhere from 2 hours of suspension to up to 120 hours. Sorry, 120. Yeah, 120 hours in which the chief can impose any disciplinary action is grievable, and they, meaning the employee, may choose to go through the grievance process for that level of discipline. If it's anything above 120, such as demotion or termination, that would consist of a recommendation to the county manager from the chief of police, because that is the only level in which the county manager can impose.
Thank you.
Any questions about that further?
How long does a contact card stay in file?
1 year.
And the other letters?
So when we say 1 year, 1 year is in your shift level file. We have a shift level file, and you have your IA file. The IA file, it does not get removed.
Okay.
All right, so going back, you had time to review it, take some notes, and we're going to walk through it again, all right? So starting with the executive summary, it's just that. It gives the who, when, where, the officers involved, the policy violations that are to be investigated, and lays out the basic facts and ultimately the finding of the investigation. It gives you that snapshot to be able to see this is the basic facts, what we have. Now we get to walk through of how we came to that conclusion. So it's a good way to set yourself up as you begin to read. First part with writing the investigation, but like I had spoken to earlier, it's a lot about just gathering what you have, the body camera footage, the CAD report, which is a computer automated dispatch. We have the record of the officers being dispatched there, times, responses, how the call was cleared. So we gather all that information, and again, body-worn camera is invaluable in this case, right? It gives you a first-hand account of what happened, what was said. So contacting the complainant, he's sent the email, I have that information, reviewed the body camera, we have that information, but it's really important for our office to contact them as soon as possible to let them know we received the complaint. And then if they have any additional details to add, sometimes people submit the complaint, they're maybe a little upset about what happened, so it's good to follow up with them, add any detail or clarify anything that we may have that we need to from what we've seen so far in the investigation. And the door is always open. They can always call back and add an email anytime if something else were to come So we call back Mr. Wallace. Again, he reiterates a lot of the same things we already know, just confirming that based on the evidence that we have through the body-worn camera. And he explains a little bit more about what he's dealing with his insurance company and some problems and stuff. In that conversation, again, we tell him our office is the investigation is assigned to me. I'll be your point of contact. I'll be conducting this. I'll keep you updated throughout the process. And again, reach out if you have anything else to add. So looking into the review of the incident, using that body-worn camera, the CAD, just writing the story, painting the picture from beginning to end, right? From when officers were dispatched, when they got there, the information they learned, up to the point to where they, again, started getting away from policy as far as properly conducting investigations of a motor vehicle accident. We outline that in the report. Then we start our interviews with the officers, right? We have prepared, we have our facts, our offices of fact finding, right? We're there to present that to the officers, ask them questions, present them with the facts, ask them questions, the actions they took, why they took it, or why they didn't take action in this case, as far as taking a report. And as you read, they had an excuse. They wanted to go for breakfast. They had an escort. They were just going to kind of hope it goes away. And we reiterate to them that obviously not acceptable. An important thing at the very bottom of that is we ensured the case was assigned to that officer and it was completed. So Mr. Stephen does get a full investigation of the accident in a timely manner, and we make it right. And so that officer is responsible for doing that as well. Interview primary officer, and that's important to remember, primary officer Stalter. The backup officer, which is Officer James, conduct an interview with him. Again, same information presented to him. You recall going on scene. What did you think? What steps did you take? What steps did you not take? Why did you not take the steps? He explains. I kind of thought there should have been something. He's a senior. I thought he would do the right thing, but he didn't. So there's misconduct there, and we make sure we reiterate to them that unacceptable, right? You see something, it's their job is to stand up, whether it's a coworker, citizen, anyone, speak up, right? Especially when you're kind of thinking this is the right way to handle things. So that's what we expect the officers to do. Conduct an interview with both of those officers. At the conclusion of those interviews, take another review. Just go back and through, making sure we've asked the right questions, gotten all the information we can, and then we come to our conclusion that both officers were in violation of department policy. Officer Dalton in violation of the motor vehicle accident policy. There's a lot of things he did not adhere to in that policy, and that's why he was chosen as violating that policy. Officer James, the duty of responsibilities. He was there as a backup officer, part of the aid and assist investigation for the citizen call for service. He failed to follow through with that call for service and assist as he's supposed to. So hence the two separate ones. And it's important for us to get that right. We have a very robust policy that really is, I believe, is well written, and we want to apply the appropriate misconduct where it fits instead of a larger blanket catch-all. That kind of makes sense, and especially in this case with the motor vehicle accident investigation that wasn't proper. At the conclusion, it clearly states what they did wrong. We include language from the policy that reiterates that. Finding is sustained. All the files that are attached to the investigation, all the pieces of data and information that we use to get to where we are at this point. The recommendation, a separate piece of paper, even though it's on the back of this one. So the recommendation is going to come from those officers' direct supervisor. And as it's outlined there, those are the steps the sergeant takes, reviews their history, consults with OPR to see, has he had these problems before? How recent? How many? Right? And once they learn of that, they kind of formulate their recommendation based solely on what happened on this call, but also history and what they're experiencing with that officer on shift, their direct supervisor. They are aware of a lot more than we are because we don't interact with them that day. So that's really important to take into account when they coming in to make the recommendation. The sergeant consults, gives a recommendation, and in this instance, it was a shift level counseling in the form of a contact card, in which Chief Chamberlain just explained what that is, shift level counseling, goes in their personnel file, stays there for a year. However, it's attached permanently to the investigation in their IA file. That recommendation by the sergeant sent through the chain of command to the squad lieutenant. Lieutenant reviews all this. They've concurred, as it's indicated down there. The captain then reviews this, concurs with the recommendation of that contact card, and then to the deputy chief of operations, deputy chief.
No, that says Deputy Chief Haas.
Oh, okay, sorry. Deputy Chief Haas in here, and they concur with the investigation as well. So the recommendation starts with the officer's direct supervisor, who consults OPR, and then it's important it goes to that chain of command, those layers of review to ensure that we're getting it right. We've looked at all parts and multiple layers that through that chain of command agrees on the finding of sustain.
The matrix. Yeah.
So for purposes of training purposes for us here today, we formulated what our considerations usually are in the process of reviewing investigations and making sure that they are above excellence, as I would consider it. So we provided that for you today of some of the things that you can consider only as a guideline, nothing that's concrete, to review and understand. Unfortunately for those on virtual, I don't have that information on the here today with us with a screen.
So the recommendation is always made by the supervisor?
Yes, OPR has nothing to do with the recommendation for discipline. What they do provide is the history in that particular information that you see there. They don't make any recommendations. What they will do is advise the chief if there is discipline imposed, is whether it's fair and consistent with other discipline for the same type or similar activity for any previous incidents.
Oh, so they.
Or by other people.
So that's part of what you provide to the chief is where this sort of fits in a, yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, generally speaking, there's no tick to incidents that are going to be exactly the same.
Right. But
However, what's in that ballpark specific to that type of violation of policy.
and you said, sorry, it stays in the ship level file person. Is that the
For
person?
contact card, the discipline for the contact card is for a year.
Okay,
However, for an IA file, it's there forever.
okay.
So I'm trying to think about the junior officer and sort of what his incentives are to speak up versus not to say anything.
Sorry.
Okay, so say he didn't feel comfortable saying something at the time.
Okay.
Would there be another avenue for him to sort of, because I totally understand why a junior officer would not say something. Now, in this instance, if the person is beating somebody to a pulp, that's a different matter. I don't get that at all. But in this instance, I could certainly understand his calculation, which is, if I say something, I have a high probability that my supervisor here is, or the senior officer is going to get back at me at some time. If I don't say something, what are the chances anybody's ever going to know? I mean, unless somebody files a complaint, which probably doesn't happen as often as it might. So how do you help to create a culture where they're protected if they say something? Or what other ways can they?
Do you want to answer?
I was gonna say, I think the premise that, well, if I don't say anything, no one's gonna find out because the person is not gonna complain. I think that's not the calculus that an officer on the street makes. They're going to, if I was the junior officer in that situation, I would be like, hey, we need to take a report because this guy went to the hospital, and if we don't do anything, he's going to complain on us. We need to do something. That is the calculation that is made on the street, because I've seen this play out many, many times. Like, the chance of getting a complaint on something like this is very high because you have an individual whose car was totaled, went to the hospital, and now you're standing there to do nothing. So for this particular circumstance, I would say that the incentive is the junior officer does not want to be, an accomplice to something that he should not be doing. And so that's the calculation there. And then for the second part of the equation, which is like, how do we create a culture that, you know, encourages things like this to come forward? And I think in my time here, I think what you do is, if the officers trust the staff at OPR, if the officers build that trust and relationship with their first line supervisors, that's how that culture occurs. And I can tell you right now, the gentlemen that sit behind me talk every day with the supervisors, with the officers, so they've built that sort of street cred to be like, you can come to us. We are willing to understand and like accept these things and then thoroughly figure out what happened. So,
And I think most importantly is I think we empower our people to make their decision. Like, okay, you're not going to take the report, although you're the primary. I'm going to take it because it's the right thing to do. So I do believe from day one, as part of our orientations, the different pre-academy, we just did a pre-academy session, Reeve. So that's part of pre-academy. You do the right thing. There is a whole introduction of what expectations are here, and that's the reason why we have our high standard of excellence, is because of that. So I think it's not that we start at some point in the midst of training, it's the beginning, but it's also part of, you know, that is the standards of policing in Arlington County, that is the expectation, is for you to service the community. And that is part of our high level of service. So that's one thing I think that is pretty much understood. And I don't think junior, senior, anything's gonna matter. I'll take the paper then. I think that it would just be, well, I'll take the paper. And then the supervisor question is, this was your area. Why you take the paper? And he was on the calls. So it all works out at the same time.
I should say that this sort of thing is a problem everywhere. This is, when you have a hierarchical structure, it's always a problem. For junior people, are always going to feel a little bit. So I'm not singling out ACPD and saying, you know, you guys have to problem. This is a problem in anything that has sort of a hierarchical structure. And obviously, the police have to have a hierarchical structure because that's how you make sure that chaos doesn't happen and things get done when they need to happen.
Exactly.
So,
I think one thing I would add to that is we're a little unique in that there's options. If the employee is for some reason a little more comfortable to talk to his or her sergeant because that's who they work with every day, they can go to OPR. They can go to their deputy chief. They can go to the employee groups. And these things happen. I mean, the culture is there. I've been in IA twice, and I've certainly been involved with it for many years now. And we do have people that bring things forward. So I think, but that's a 83-year building of a culture to where we have, the agency has high expectations of us, and we have high expectations of each other. So I think, that's something that's always been meaningful to me, is that we do have complaints that generate from within, and it's an important thing to make sure that you're watching. So the police department that has no complaints coming from within, you have to ask why.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things that goes to the heart of all of this. The feeling is like you can actually bring a complaint. I think it's a great point to bring up. And, my sense is that culture is there, and I think you're right, it takes a long time to build that.
It does. It's built on trust and years. And, if an officer brings something to OPR, everything that we can do to try to protect that person's confidentiality, the agency puts a lot of effort into that. Does it always work? No. If Tosh and I are on the call together and we're the only ones there, and all of a sudden she gets called into OPR, well, but the agency still does what it can to make it as comfortable as that scenario can be for anybody to be in.
So did you say you were going to take all the paperwork? Is that what you said? It was a nice try.
I have a question. I'd rather have questions in 3 areas. The first one is in the section of the investigation where it says that both officers were given an opportunity to review the manual and their body-worn cameras, and he was trying to recall recall what we did out at the academy or maybe it was the prior training that we had here at the last meeting. But was there some investigations that were being done where we did not let them see, but this one they said we let them see the stuff. So I'm just trying to figure out, is this standard and
Right.
opportunity actually literally mean opportunity, or does it mean they actually saw it?
Right, so 2 parts.
Yes.
That opportunity is that they saw it.
Okay. Opportunity.
However, what you're referring to is when we had the, any officer-involved action that resulted in death and bodily injury conversation, that's that type of event. That is the one event in which the officer does not have the opportunity to review any video footage of them prior to speaking to the CERT detectives. They never see that until the CERT detectives either show it to them or post the incident in terms of if there's been a declination that's taken place for them to see it. So yes, that's this particular incident.
Is there a particular reason then why for these type of situations officers are provided that?
Because we're not trying to play the gotcha. It's here are all the facts that I have. Please provide me with any circumstances thus far from what I can see in this video, and from there, it's not a gotcha moment, but considering that sometimes officers can go on 15, 20 calls a day, right? And as well as a few hit and runs to go along with it,
right.
You know, that's reasonable versus the officer involved incident where bodily injury. I think they're going to know what incident we're referring to on that one. And 2, there's a time frame in which, you know, some of these complaints, there may be months in between as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean always that this is like the next day, such as this incident.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
And one of the important differences is in the officer-involved shooting scenario, it's important for the investigators to talk with the officer about what he or she remembers at the time, how they feel at the time before the video. I mean, I think normally the video is going to be shown at some point, but
right.
it's important to have that conversation first, because you don't want video changing recollection, but you know, what person remembers what they saw, how they felt. I mean, all that's very important. So it's just done a little bit differently in that scenario. That's it.
Okay. And then the 2 questions I have about the recommendation sheet is, you said this comes under a separate cover. How long of a difference is that? And when we see it, do we actually see it all together, or is it that we see one part and then under separate cover we'll eventually see the recommendation?
No, all of that would come together at that point in time.
And usually it all comes together, so it doesn't really matter how much.
Yeah, and so we have a little bit different format too, where you can also see the timeline and who had it in their review bucket. Okay. So there's, in the now actual processing of those documents, it goes through our blue team system. And so you'll see, like, I had it a period of time and how long I had it in my inbox and what time I particularly signed off on it. So you'll be able to see the progression associated with it. And you'll also see in the midst of that, if at some supervisory level in that review, hey, there needs to be consideration, reference this.
Okay.
And then it gets put back to that supervisor to do further investigation. So you will also see that as well.
And then my final question is, if in the sign off someone does not concur, what would that look like if someone didn't concur? What more would I see?
You'll see that further details, like I said, like, okay. Oh, I don't agree with that. You'll see it in the next one a little bit more that we go through because we did make that a part of that, that spill. So we'll get a little further deep into that.
Thank you.
I have a question. So kind of on the other side of the coin with the dynamic between the junior officer and the senior officer. The senior officer was a corporal, right? All right. So being that senior officer is in a more, I guess you could say, like supervisory type of, or like senior level position in this situation. Or let's say that whether or not he is a supervisor in this particular scenario, but let's just say he's a senior officer, but let's take that a step further and say like he's a supervisor, right? Obviously all employees are, required to follow the same rules, but is there a heightened level of I don't know if scrutiny is the right word, but a heightened level of analysis that you apply when you're looking at a scenario where you have, let's say, a supervisor and an employee, and particularly like in this situation where, you know, you could read into his answer to say like he knew kind of that he needed to do this, but he was trying to hurry up and go get breakfast or whatever it was he was doing. So it was kind of like avoiding his responsibilities. How does that factor into your assessment?
So is this for the discipline or the findings?
It could be either or. I don't know if there are necessarily like, I don't think that there are specific allegations that are related to like your duty as a supervisor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is.
So in that case, then like, you know, in that, I guess you could have a separate allegation. But I think also in the discipline, you know, that would be something that you might consider as well, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Our supervisors, you're leading your squad, you're leading your people, you're being considered as an example. And there is a whole supervisory section of policy that you need to make sure that you uphold. So if that person is the supervisor versus just simply being a senior officer, but also understand too, our corporal and our officer, those are ranks, neither one of those are supervisors.
Yeah.
And just because you're a corporal, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the senior officer either. So
in this particular scenario, we're to assume that it's a junior and a senior officer, and you didn't feel comfortable speaking, right?
Right.
So just on that level, so supervisor, you've already answered that question. So on the senior officer level, are there like heightened expectations, or does that factor into your analysis?
Your years of service absolutely always consists, you know, is considered in the midst of this. You really knew better, right? So, and your years of experience and training, all of that is a factor as well.
Or say it was a field training officer, right? They're teaching a recruit officer. That would be another thing we consider. Okay, it's not just your normal patrol officer who's been on for 2 years or 4 years. You've got an officer training another officer and they're doing this, then yes, that would be another thing taken into account.
So what does that look like in practice? Like if that's part of the analysis, like what's the result of that? Whether it's discipline or like in this particular situation, it looks like the recommendation or in terms of the discipline was the same, but I don't know if that necessarily means that the conversation that happened between their supervisor and like the supervisor for Corporal Dalton versus the supervisor for Officer James was the same type of conversation.
That conversation will depend on the circumstances as well. Yes, the seniority of the officer, the position of the officer, the past of the officer, right? And that's another reason why it goes down to the squad level for recommendation, right? The chain of command is responsible for that because they know all those. Me as the OPR lieutenant, I may not necessarily know all the nuances of that officer, how they interact with people on a daily basis, what their history is, what their proficiencies are, what their deficiencies are. So that's another reason for the recommendation going through the chain of command, because the chain of command is more familiar with that officer and their position and their history. So yeah.
And also, with that, like I said, we're very clear on empowering people to do the right thing, which the right thing for us is our policy. But that doesn't change the circumstance that there was a violation. But factually, it doesn't change the fact that there's a violation to the policy by either of those two employees, and accountability still has to take place.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I just was speaking to kind of like the additional level of consideration or analysis that's undertaken like in the allegations, and then when you're figuring out like what's the appropriate recommendation, whether it's a training recommendation or the conversation like between that person's supervisor, their contact card, or whatever goes into their discipline analysis.
Yep.
And supervisors are held to an even higher standard.
Right.
So, you know, we expect a lot of everybody, but if you're going to promote, the farther up you go, the more it's going to be expected. And then, you know, if a lieutenant and an officer do the same behavior, the discipline's going to look very different.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was getting at, like just getting an explanation for, or having people go listen to like how you factor in those pieces about it.
Yeah, and I think if that person was a supervisor, we would also include an additional allegation for failure to supervise. One that would not apply to these two officers because they're not subordinate teachers.
But I think the FTO example I really like. Mm-hmm. If, you know, in that scenario, say you have an FTO, so it should be a senior person, and you have somebody who's been out of the infield training for 3 or 4 days. Do they really know when they have to take a report and when they don't? Probably not. If their FTO is like we're good. You know, would we sustain something against a new officer if it's reasonable to believe that they were doing what they thought was right? So it is case by case, but like Tosh said, that, you know, when there's a violation, there's a violation, but there has to be the ability to build in sometimes, like, if I've been out there 3 days and my FTO's like, we're good, and it's, do you take a report or this form or that form? I mean, so all that comes into play.
Yeah.
Yeah, now they don't really know what to do.
No, I think those are all important considerations, and I was just trying to highlight that there is some, you know, there's some black and white to this, but there is also some like individual analysis that, you know, I can take into consideration when determining how to resolve some of these issues.
Very much.
Can you describe how, excuse me, this process would work with the IPA and how, you know, I mean, I'm just reading through the MOU, so.
Well, I think we can start here with the document that we presented to you guys as some of the guidelines or things that you're looking at. I think most importantly is investigative plan. That's one thing I think from the MOU perspective that we've discussed, that there is an investigative plan. An investigative plan for us is who we're going to interview, who are we going to, what evidence are we going to look at, and also ensuring that we have a good number of people in the room, which generally is OPR. And then for this sake, I can see where Mummy would either want to be included or she may decline and say, y'all got that, I'm not. I mean, that option is built into the ordinance. And then, like I said, for completeness is where everyone identified and interviewed. One of the things we didn't show you for the sake of time is we do have both body-worn camera footages for both of those, and from our CAD call list, we'll know the officers who were there on scene. That's the most important piece there. The evidence was identified, and the evidence for us for this particular incident was the body-worn camera footage. The investigation plan reflected the scope of the allegations under consideration. Lieutenant Allen explained to you, they initially identified what allegations would fit the complaint that was there and what they needed to consider. However, I think I just want to make sure also very clear too, is say in the course of this video, outside of what was complained on, if we see another violation of policy that is there and it's just there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the community member is aware of our policy or what would be inappropriate, we're still going to address that violation as well, and that would become an additional violation to policy. But then you also have things like Lieutenant Allen said in terms of overarching, like you put one allegation there, and it may be this allegation is the greater of the lesser included of those two. Just like we don't typically go to the magistrate and expect that the prosecutor would stack charges on someone, and when you have lesser included offenses to make that parallel for criminal law to administrative violations. The investigative plan, like I said, reflected the scope of the allegations under consideration. The investigative procedures were followed appropriately. So you're going to go, those are all the things that we are going to go through to make sure. And when we say the procedures, it's the due process, because the subject officers of an investigation have due process. And one of the things you'll find in the investigation is they were given their employee rights and responsibilities, as well as their confidentiality orders. While you're currently under an investigation, you are not allowed to speak to anyone during that time. And at the conclusion of an investigation, your confidentiality order is released. Remember, these are still personnel records, so it's not like, oh, I can go blast this somewhere else, but respectfully.
And what does the employee rights and responsibilities generally say? I mean, is there anything in there, and I don't know as much as I might, but I mean, what are there requirements that they discuss this, or if they choose not to?
This interview is a compelled interview, unlike a criminal interview where you have the right to remain silent.
Right.
You don't have a right to remain silent as a condition of your employment. You have to answer our questions fully and truthfully. So that is one of the things, part of the breakdown of what takes place in the midst of employee rights and responsibilities. Right. And that is that form and that confidentiality order to understand our process specifically, we read that form from the top to the bottom. We give them a copy to follow along with us because we want to make sure that you clearly understand that you are under an investigation and these are your rights and your responsibilities in regards to that investigation.
Which is why it happens after the criminal, if for some reason this rises to, God forbid, but yeah.
Yes, correct.
Because that messes up the criminal case.
Yeah, if there's a criminal investigation, it will always be first done before the administrative piece.
Right. That compelling statement is
Big deal.
it's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
It is a very big deal. And then for accuracy, we look at making sure all these things are part of our ACPD directives. As Lieutenant Allen went through, he examined each part of that and went down with you the reason, all the different points of the reason why that was important to look at that particular allegation in particular, because there's all the signs just by his statement, his injury, the amount of damage that's there, that's required. Not just our policy requirement, that's a requirement by the state as well. And so for each one of those, you're just going to go down each one of those, and those are things not only do we do as part of our investigation to make sure all the information is there, but each one of those parties, and I'll tell you, we don't look at a sheet that looks like that, but these are all the things that are part of consideration to keep us on track appropriately. But that each supervisor, as they're reviewing it, this is what their consideration is, ensuring that it's a concise investigation, including all matters and not leaving anything out. Any other questions? I'm not sure, David, did I answer yours totally?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions reference that? Does anyone have any dialogue on any other recommendations in particular? All right.
I do wonder at what point is a citizen made whole though? You still have a situation where you use this report for insurance.
No, it's done. That was one of the things the report is done. Like if you, that would be our number one priority, is ensure that this report is done because they do need that and it is a requirement. So we do go back and say, you're correct.
Right.
Let's see how we can help you and get this report done. So yeah, we will send someone back out there.
Right.
To,
but not the same officers, I assume.
It all depends.
Okay.
Considering whatever the circumstances were at the time. But generally speaking, if that was the case, we would send somebody's going.
Okay. And what part of this does the citizen get? Of this whole, like they
don't get anything of this information because this is part of a personnel record of the IA file. However, they get a closure letter from us citing, hey, this is what happened, and we held this officer accountable.
Okay.
We don't go into investigative measures.
Okay.
We just advise them that it was cleared and investigated by us.
Okay.
But you do inform the complainant of whether the officer violated the policy?
Yeah. When we were reviewed by Hillard Hines, our process, our letters, how we push those letters out were consistent to the high standards in the midst of that review as well. Particularly our investigative style, that was one thing that I think I was very happy to see and understand when they did they conducted that part of the review. These were random. We gave them all of our case numbers to review. They chose a random set. We provided that random set that they asked for. Like, so they just had a list of all of our investigations and they said, we wanted this, 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 and this. We didn't pick and choose which ones they were able to see. So these were totally random by their system. They literally put it in an electronic system that gave them an electronic feedback and said, we want all of these. So that's how we made the decision of their sample. Well, not really our decision. They made the decision of the sample that they would see. Jimmy, like you have a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I do. Nonverbals. Once you give this information back to the complainant saying, look, this is the decision we made for the county by for a policy, have you had someone in particular, like we're sticking with this example, submit a FOIA request for this? And then that.
Yeah,
Do
we,
you give it over?
yeah,
Or- or
we do not give that over. It is strict, it is
this is not
restricted.
FOIL.
Exactly.
Try not to make that over. In a FOIA request, they wouldn't be able to get
No.
this. But they would get additional information potentially that was not otherwise shared with them.
Additional information with the investigation.
Yeah, no.
No, I mean, if they have questions, we'll answer some basic questions. If it's, say that this return and we say the officer was exonerated for their actions, we will ask them if you want to come in and watch the video with us and we'll walk through it. I have given that offer several times and no one has ever taken me up on it, or they've made an appointment and not showed for the appointment, so.
It just, I think it shows a little bit of the transparency of the police department on your part to say, here's what happened and here's how we're going to resolve it. That's great. Thanks.
Any other questions? You guys have anything on the references?
Yeah, I mean, we do get, and the example you gave, we get people that call us, and I was talking to Mummy earlier today, who call them that, I don't recall that, well, this is what I saw, and like that Chief Chamberlain said, you know, invite to come watch the video, and that's what it is. We'll answer whatever questions they have, but obviously we're not gonna give the actual information. And we get that, it happens from time to time. I was on the phone last week, about their investigation. I was like, this is what I saw, this is what occurred. They were like, I don't recall that, but okay.
I think that's a lot of it. I mean, I've spent a lot of years in IA, and sometimes just explaining the why. And people, it doesn't mean somebody's going to be thrilled, but explaining why people did what they did, some of the legal requirements, safety, what was on the video, sometimes just having the conversation and explaining procedure and why really helps people understand better. And it's, you know, any opportunity we have to leave the complainant or the community member feeling better about it, ideally feel good about the end result, but at least better, you know, the conversations are worth it. But this is all personnel information. So, you know, there's not going to be a scenario where the entire report is shared with people. It's just, you know, it's a balancing, you know, we want to be transparent, that's important to us, but we also have to protect the officer's confidentiality as well.
So procedurally, if there came a point or an incident where, you know, we as a COB had a different view of the outcome, how does that work? And so I looked at the chart you had there before, which is you go through all this process and the investigation is closed. And then Mummy makes, like, at what point do we learn about the investigation? And at what point does Mummy make a you know, sort of formal, you know, give us information? And then what can we do, you know, if we were to disagree?
Well, that's where the one thing that's consistent throughout the ordinance, it speaks to that you can write a recommendation letter to the chief explaining what you oppose, disagree with, or any concerns or policy recommendations, and then the chief would then respond within 30 days. However, we would not go back through and reopen an investigation at that point, but it would potentially, whatever is recommended, if it's, you know, the discipline was not severe enough, or you guys have a heavy hand that we don't like this, this is an opportunity where we can reevaluate, but at that point, that investigation is closed.
So, and will we get information from Mummy during the course of the investigation and be able to communicate back with her? Like, let's say, you know, that you did interview somebody that we thought you should. Would we be able to like feed that back to Mummy, and, you know, Mummy said, hey, you know, and she would make a request to you? I mean, is there some opportunity for that?
I think there is opportunity for it. Like I said, Mummy would be, according to the ordinance, how I have read it, and as well as the chart itself, it allows for, you know, hey, she can update you on that current complaint and let you know what we're doing for it. But these have a pretty significant turnaround time on the actual investigation, usually, because we're coming into our OPR.
Right. And so how many of these do you handle I mean, I know.
Last year, we had 64 externals. I believe 64.
Right. And so that's in addition to that, and I know you talked about the numbers before, but it's sort of different thinking of it now when we're sort of actually going through it step by step. So in addition to these externals, what role do we play, Mummy play, COB play with regard to internal? Is it the same thing?
There's no process for an internal.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so that's like
So we're-
somebody just complains or says, hey, I think something, like in this case, if the junior officer said, let's say there was no public complaint, and the junior officer didn't do anything on the scene, and then later came to you and said, I think we should file a report, or we should have done something. How would that play out?
We conduct an investigation.
Oh, okay, so, but like, that sounds like the same process. Like,
The process of the investigation, but that is considered an internal complaint.
so there's no process for Mummy or the COB?
No.
Okay. Okay. I get that.
Okay. Any other questions?
That's one of the things that, I flagged for more discussion around.
Yeah, because actually, that's something I flagged in the draft. I'm like, I didn't realize it was limited to external complaints. Is that kind of explicitly in the ordinance? Is that the way it's?
Yeah, it says public complaints.
Okay.
That was from our feedback sessions, our listening sessions, and part of PPG's final recommendation.
Because are you asking for the board to, if they had internal?
Yeah, I was asking if there,
You had 64 last year?
That's the external.
External, okay. What did you have internal? How many?
I think it's right about the same number. It's almost 50-50 on a percentage wise. So somewhere 62, 60. It may have been a little over last year. So it may have been like 65, 66. But internal also includes, for that purpose, it's going to be majority of the things that people may bring to us. However, we do basic investigations on police vehicles and things like that too.
Missing cord.
Missing cords. Missing cords.
Yeah.
That's huge because that goes to the reputation of the department. So that is a internal allegation that we handle each one of those. So, or failing to, what's another one?
Red light camera.
Red light camera.
Red light camera.
So we hold people accountable for red light cameras as well.
Showing up late to work, which is like a lot of businesses deal with employees that show up late to work. If you show up late to work, that is a policy violation, and that will be investigated, and there will be something that happens after that. So it's those kinds of things that handle internally, which all business and organizations handle internally.
Are use of force incidents considered to be internal investigations?
So use of force incident, it is not considered as internal in the sense of this discussion. Use of force is handled at the shift level. As the investigation, it would then come to OPR for review. And then this is one in which Mummy would have the opportunity to review a use of force, and then she would be able to report out on the sufficiency.
Do you want to touch on any of the rationale or the reasoning behind the distinction between internal and external complaints?
Rationale?
Like why the focus of the ordinance on external complaints versus internal?
Well, a lot of the conversation in those meetings will reference being clear what transpired in the investigations from community members. And so that's where the big strong focus of the support was for. We want to make sure our community members, if they have a concern, that their concern is being taken care of. That was a strong focus on the reason why it was referenced public complaints. And that was at all levels in the midst of those sessions. All right. Do you guys want to take a quick break, or we can jump into the next one?
I'm okay.
I'm okay.
Does anyone want a break?
All right. We will press through, and this is the last scenario. For those of you who are on on virtually, just a reminder, these are training videos. There is explicit language briefly that's in this video. And we will only play it one time for that simplification purpose.
It's the same guy.
Not today.
I know, I was like, is it the same thing?
I'll give you all a second to review the complaint.
Is it the same person?
Yeah.
These are all training, so they're gonna have.
Oh.
But we use the same name.
Oh,
That
wait a
confused me too.
minute.
FYI, that confused me too.
Names can change.
He's the one that sponsored the door.
This is facts, man.
Yeah, so just take a second to read that. I mean, obviously, this is common to receive a citizen complaint via email in our ACPD internal affairs mailbox, and this is part of some of the information you get. Sometimes you get a lot, sometimes you get a little, sometimes you get in between, and that's why it's always important to establish some type of contact with the citizen. Sometimes they want to talk over the phone, sometimes they prefer email because they want to document it a certain way, but everyone has their rationale. So reading through the complaint, what's the issue we see?
The vague citation
Okay.
And he cursed at him.
and wouldn't contact a supervisor.
Okay, yeah, so those are all valid concerns, right? So those are things we're going to want to address in our investigation. That's how we develop our plan. What are we looking at? What policy violations are we looking at, right? So that's how we start out, and we go from there.
Is that, y'all have enough supervisors on shift to go to any time the board does don't want to supervisor?
So we have numerous supervisors on shift. There will be situations where a supervisor cannot respond.
Okay.
But we will make sure that a supervisor contacts that person. We oftentimes have citizens that call in. They may not request a supervisor on the scene, but they'll get home and they'll say, something's not sitting right with me, or I have a question. They'll call our dispatch center. I want to speak to a supervisor. I was stopped. An officer came to my house for this type of call. I want a supervisor to call me. Dispatch center notifies the supervisor on duty, or if there was a supervisor assigned to the call, the supervisor usually makes contact. Or they'll call our office in the OPR and say, hey, I have a question, this, that, the other, and then someone will talk to them. So there are various mechanisms. We have supervisors contact citizens because they can't come out to the scene, or because the officer informs them my supervisor is not available, or the supervisor cannot make it. They'll contact you, they'll get a phone number, an email, etc. So there are various ways of doing it. But yes, not in every instance will a supervisor be able to respond. There could be a critical incident, something else going on. So there's a variety of factors. All right, so we'll move to the video. Obviously, as this investigating supervisor, you've developed some of your policy violations, potential policy violations. You want to make contact with the citizen. You want to know what's available. Is there body camera, right? And yes, there is body camera. So this is what you're going to see when you review the body camera.
Martine, can you confirm that you can see this?
Yes, I can see it.
So before it actually comes in the audio, I think this is quite impressive because you'll see the weather that they have here. And much like today, it is quite impressive that they decided to do their Academy Award winning performance for training.
All night, all our training videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sensor because the sensor in the car camera and then trigger
So that body worn camera activation came from the officer activating his emergency.
That automatically activates the monitor. Yeah.
There is literally snow on the ground. Yes, please. Dedicated.
I realized that it was Saturday after
I would move the phone the next day. Everything flights up, usually happens.
It's like,
he said
Said it under his breath. Good microphone. All right, so obviously, what's the issue? What's the glaring issue? Everything was good up until the ticket came out, right?
Yeah.
And the citizen wanted to argue the ticket with a supervisor. Is that a valid reason to call a supervisor to the scene? No, but does a citizen have a right to speak to a supervisor at some point about the ticket? Yeah, absolutely, right? But the officer's being rude, officer calls him a fucking asshole. Excuse my language. I apologize.
What was the briefing before the meeting?
He uses profanity and walks away from the situation, and that's what we have, right? So take a look at the investigation, just like we did previous, and see what you think. And then there's also the recommendation. So we talked, the question was brought up about the recommendation. What happens if there is a deviation from the original recommendation? And then we'll go into that as well, and how that works out. It's important for the supervisor who supervises the officer in that chain of command to make that recommendation. That's why we have the process we do.
Okay, Martine, I'm gonna rely on you again. I will keep moving it. If I move too fast or too slow, just let me know.
Sure, thank you.
She said, what did the officer say?
If I do it, I might get an investigation by.
7 simultaneous complaints. We'll
Like,
set a new
right.
record.
That's fine. I'll send it to Captain Kim. He's gonna have to deal with it. Good way to break him in.
They actually say it several times in the
Yeah.
report.
Gotta quote
So
what the,
it's- there's no way of missing it.
no, no way. Gotta be thorough, correct?
Extremely thorough.
And accurate.
And accurate.
So you probably should,
What should have
what he should have,
issued the ticket?
well, he should, okay, so he shouldn't have used foul language, but aside from that,
Issued the ticket and supervisor couldn't come out. That's gonna be the supervisor's determination. to take it.
okay, so they don't make that. They would,
Yes,
Let
in
it
most
know
instances,
somebody-
yes, in most instances, unless it's something where it's just blatantly obvious the person doesn't want a supervisor. With that, we tell them, they want a supervisor, notify the supervisor. If I, as a supervisor, say, I'm not able to come out, I can't make it out, I'm not coming out for that reason, I have that rationale, but I will attempt to make contact with them in some form. I will call call me at this number, etc.
It's very educational, because I never would have even thought to ask for, not that I ever get stuck. But if I did, I would.
Is that your disclaimer?
It never even occurred to me to ask for, so this is very educational. I have no idea I didn't ask.
And in this instance, he wants to do it so he can try and get out of the ticket, to argue the ticket, right? The officer at that point has not done anything that anyone would construe as a policy violation, right? He has been cordial, they have been cordial until that, as Mummy said, until that paper comes back. And then all of a sudden, well, I don't want this ticket, so bring your supervisor. But nevertheless, his demeanor with that citizen then escalates and turns into what it does, and so.
That's what I was interested in, what he, because like, if he's not required to get the supervisor, but you're telling me he is. Otherwise, if he's not required, it's sort of like you should just cut off the conversation and say,
Yeah,
you know,
and
I'm
we-
really sorry, have a nice evening, goodbye.
Yeah, and if we did that, think of how many more issues we would have, right? If you walk up there and you're like, I want to see the supervisor because I feel this situation is unfair, whether it's a traffic stop or you stop someone on the street for something, or it's a call for service where you've called, I've come, like the motor vehicle accident, right?
Okay, what if the person didn't ask for a supervisor because like me, they had no idea they could ask for one?
Mm-hmm.
Should the officer have suggested you could talk to the supervisor?
No, because the supervisor is not going to be able to void the ticket unless there's some,
So he has no requirement to say.
no.
In that case, he probably.
But there are
should have said, "Really
instances,
sorry."
yeah, but there are instances where an officer will call their supervisor. They're like, you need to come down here. The citizen is irate. The citizen is not listening to me. I feel like something might come out of this. I want you down here to address this issue. And then the supervisor will come down. We actually see that a lot.
Right, and also understand is that as the supervisor that comes out, they're not gonna second guess that ticket. Because just like the officer does tell him before the inappropriate language piece, is that he addresses, this is something that now goes to court, and if that's where you wanna, that's the venue to dispute that. And a lot of times we may get complaints where they were wanting to dispute the actual violation and the ticket. And we'll still handle those appropriately, but we also inform them that this request or complaint is something that's actually going to be handled in court. We're not playing judge and jury out here in the field.
All right, so any questions about the investigation? We'll get to the recommendation part and just go over that as well, but what are your thoughts?
Give me just a second, I haven't got them all.
Oh, okay.
A little nuance in that last statement. I understand you're saying that we're not playing judge and jury, but if it's something that clearly just wasn't something that warranted a ticket, it just wasn't, and you just want to make sure this officer knows that this is not, I mean, you know, there's other things, but this just wasn't the, you know, thing, then how then is that complaint clear? Let me restate this, see confusion, and I wasn't as articulate as I could have been. What I heard you state was that if we received a complaint that was about the law and not the action, you know,
Right.
the law and not the action, that we'll handle that, but we're not going to sit here and you know play judge on it. But if clearly if it clearly was just not a violation, then what result?
So if it wasn't a violation and we can clearly see there's not a violation, and we would need to absolutely clearly need to be able to have evidence that would demonstrate that, then we would also speak to the officer. The investigation would be the same in that regard, to understand, you know, was this a lawful stop? Was this a lawful infraction that you wrote?
Right.
As well. So if that's the case, then that's handled differently. But is there still an investigation in terms of looking into the actions to ensure that it was appropriate or proper? Yes. However, if the officer is writing what we would consider to be a lawful ticket in the midst of that, we're not going to tell them to get rid of or speak against that. They have the ability to make those decisions independently. If it doesn't have a shall, then it's a may, and they may enforce that traffic infraction.
Good.
So if he hadn't used profanity, just didn't have the supervisor come, Do you think the disciplinary action would have been the same?
Well, it depends on all the circumstances, like we said before, right? So what's the officer's history? What situation have they been in before? And so in this instance, you see that they have a previous violation, right? So that's why that chain of command comes into play, right? You check with OPR, what are the previous violations? Because in the IA file, we have all of those, right? And that's why the supervisor would come to us and say, unless they didn't have it in their own personnel file downstairs, what did they do before? Is this a pattern? Is this indicative, this action indicative of something they've done or they've come close to doing in the past? And that's where that comes from. So it may not necessarily be your second violation or third violation that bumps you up. It could be that this violation is egregious. Now you look at it, you look at the totality of the circumstances. Okay, they didn't curse at the person. They told the person, hey, come to court, do this, do that. They weren't rude. They were like, sir, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. You want to call a supervisor to do this. I'm not having a supervisor come here. That might be a little different, right? But in this situation, it is, I'm not calling a supervisor, we're not arguing about this, and you are a blah, blah, blah. That's what makes this a little more. And the person has a previous violation. It may not be the same circumstances, but it's for the same policy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the way he handled the supervisor issue apart from the bad language as problematic? I mean, it didn't come off that way to me particularly.
Are you saying that?
Like, because he said definitively, I'm not calling supervisor, as opposed to, well, I could, but I thought that was okay.
To a certain degree, it is, but it's all encompassing, right? You're explaining why you're doing it, and then you're getting into the position where you're being rude, right? You're like, I'm not going to, it's not happening, etc. And then you use the profanity on top of it. So you have to take that all into account. If you provide the citizen a reason or another avenue, that's a different story. But obviously, we're not in that space with this violation.
And I think other thing is when we look at this as well, just to piggyback off what it says, all encompassing, is we know what radio traffic generally looks like at that time of night under those circumstances. Well, that's also the reason why we were able to shoot the video during this time, but it's also snowing outside. There's nobody. Well, why can't the supervisor, what is reasonably expected of the officer if we're still trying to provide service at the same time?
And like I said, there's other avenues to do. The supervisor doesn't necessarily need to come. You can get the citizen's phone number, or the supervisor can call them. It can go both ways. There's a lot of different things.
Yeah, phone calls work great.
For this one, it says the interview was conducted during one of the officer's regular work days. Is that normally?
That's standard, yes. So it's got to be during one of their normal work days, so that we have the bill of rights.
Yeah.
We got to be there. We can't force them to be somewhere at some time,
Gotcha.
unless there are other circumstances.
Okay, so if there was other circumstances, we'll bank that too.
Well, I think one of the easiest ones for us would be, say they're coming in for court. And so, hey, when you finish court, can you stop by?
Gotcha.
That would be one of the things. Other than that, we're the ones, well, OPR is the ones who are inconvenienced, and they adapt and shift their schedule around to fit the needs of the personnel that we're addressing.
What other questions? So let's talk about the recommendation. So if you look at the recommendation, you go through it. Sergeant Smith reviewed the file, and Sergeant Smith decided that it was a violation in their eyes, and they decided that it should be an LDA, right? Letter of disciplinary action. Lieutenant Grinder gets it, who's the next level of command, right, above Sergeant Smith, and looks at it and says, while egregious, it's uncharacteristic, and they should only receive a letter of corrective action, right? So everyone's giving their opinion up until this point. They have the same facts, they have the same items available to them to review. It gets to the captain level. And Captain Trumbull concurs with Sergeant Smith's recommendation, which is a letter of disciplinary action with 4 hours taken away. That continues up the chain of command to Chief Haas and then to Chief Penn. Chief Penn gets it, who's the ultimate decision maker, because this is going to be actual discipline. It's a letter of disciplinary action and is grievable, and says this is what's coming down, and it goes down. Although someone might say, okay, there's a difference here. Why is there a difference? My personal thing is it's good that there's a difference. People need to have various opinions and talk these things out as to why, because there may be something I don't see or Chief Chamberlain doesn't see when it goes through the chain, right? Do I know this person as well as the next person? Do I know their file? Did I miss something? Either to their benefit or not to their benefit, right? It could go the other way, right? It could be a low level and then it could go a lot higher or vice versa. So I think it's healthy, but it is worked out. It goes through the chain and it's decided by all levels.
So one thing you can't see here on paper, and I know we're specifically talking about investigations, but one thing that sticks out to me when I read a statement like that, where it says the conduct was egregious, but it is uncharacteristics. Put aside the previous event that's noted here. The fact that that person is saying uncharacteristic, one of the things that it doesn't change the discipline at all. However, what I think we do a very good job at is if you think it's uncharacteristic and this seems like there's something else, we will try to find out if there's some other assistance that that particular officer may need. So what you don't see here may not always be the additional piece of what may be going on. Maybe they need a change of venue. Maybe working midnights is not the place for them because they need day work hours. Whatever additional stresses, that's information that you won't see in here because that's not going to mitigate the difference of that discipline. But as a matter of our wellness piece, like I said, we're coming back full circle, and officer wellness, that's some of the things that we consider in the midst of this that we may engage that person on. Not for every case, but that is something that you may not see here as well. And that's something you won't see because that's not a part of their, that's absolutely personal for them too.
That's part of the trust conversation because, if somebody, if OPR is dealing with something and there's concern that the officer might be struggling with something else, they'll refer it to wellness. So, and then the wellness team will talk about resources, meet with the person, hook them up with whatever works, but the information doesn't flow back. That's just as important that, OPR doesn't blast people's business, but when wellness engages to make sure that they have everything they need for the overall wellness, whatever different wellness topic we're talking about, it doesn't come back and forth. There's very, very limited circumstances where that information, that trust gets breached. And it hasn't happened yet since we've had wellness. So I hope it never does.
Everything's examined. I mean, there could be stressors at home, right? There could be stressors on job, like Chief Chamberlain said, shift-wise. Maybe who you're working with, maybe the amount of hours you're working because of whatever reason. So all those things are examined if we believe something else or someone makes that recommendation that, hey, something's not going on here. And again, and I've said this multiple times, it speaks to going through the chain of command because those supervisors at the shift level will know more about that officer. And if something is uncharacteristic, they would be the first to know, right? Unless you have direct interaction with that officer for a long period of time.
Can I ask you, go ahead. No, this is off topic though.
Oh, okay. I'll just be quick then because I think it is related to this, not even necessarily this specific one, but just for clarification around the procedure for my benefit and the COB's benefit. Do you determine what the allegations are that you're going to investigate at the investigative plan initially? And then at the end, or throughout the course of your interview or something, if additional things pop up or you look at the body worn camera footage and you're like, there are some additional things, right? You add those into your investigation. What if, well, maybe my first question is, at what point do you make the determination that you want to add the additional allegations?
So say it's at the beginning, right? Say we reviewed the body camera, we speak to the citizen, we will determine those allegations there. Say we're in the middle of the investigation, right? We're in there talking to the officer, and the officer says this, that, or the other. And now we have another policy violation, right? Something we have to stop. We have to then generate a document, put that allegation before them so that they know exactly what we're talking about. Like we've reiterated, it's not a gotcha moment, right? This is about fact finding, and we try and get everything we can before. But yes, there are instances where you're talking and other things come up. It could also be that wellness piece, right? then we have to branch off a little bit and do something else. But yeah, we would have to stop, come up with that allegation, and then we will pause and discuss it, because obviously when we're doing these interviews, there's multiple people involved outside of the office, right? From OPR, there's at least 2 or 3 people. So it's not like, okay, here's your piece of paper. All right, so blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like, okay, what else do I need to think about now, right? Let's take a couple minutes, let's hash this out, and then we go from there.
And we are very upfront. And like he said a couple times, we're letting them know what we're thinking, or, you know, what our thought process is. That is very clear. And I'm sorry, I missed out when I explained the employee rights and responsibilities. They also get a notice of those allegations up front. So it's the notice of allegations, the employee rights and responsibility, and the confidentiality order. So every allegation, if that allegation was not presented to them in the midst of that, and you can't just throw in some extra ones later on as you're typing because you missed. No, that's not how that goes. So you would either need to do an additional interview and present those additional allegations, or it's to determine if it's going to be sufficient enough to include it.
Yeah, I brought that up because sometimes I've seen in investigations where, you know, at the end where you concur on the allegation and or the discipline. The process is a little bit different in New Orleans in the sense that discipline wasn't really waited on until afterwards. But in the investigative report, for example, the investigating officer would lay out maybe the findings on the particular allegations, and then the leadership team or the higher ranking officers that would then review it would concur, and sometimes they may disagree with whether or not to sustain an allegation, or say, we actually disagree with this, we think it should have been investigated as X. And so then that would trigger like a supplemental investigation.
Well, it wouldn't be a supplemental investigation. We would just need to bring that person back in and present it again. Present the allegation again.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Well, when you were, I was trying to get a sense of like how the process happens here, because it sounds like if there is this constant communication throughout the process, I'm not sure necessarily, it sounds like the investigative plan and the conversations throughout would probably involve some of the people that end up signing off on it. So then it wouldn't be, or it would not.
Generally, no, because we want them to not be biased in when they review those documentations, unless we're finding that something's just like really over the top egregious that may lead to us needing to put them off work for some purpose. And then it would be because we don't want to taint their thought process in their review.
No, that's fair. I mean, just like if there isn't an additional allegation, you should still go through the same process. Basically what I was trying to get in terms of clarity on was whether there could be an instance where you go as deputy chief to sign off on an investigation. You say, hey, I don't agree with this finding, or hey, I think it should have been this allegation and not this allegation.
Mm-hmm. I would push it all the way back down.
Okay. So that's where you would make your first, kind of recommendation, and then it would go back to the same process.
Correct.
Okay.
So my question was just, can you describe as an overview that this is an administrative investigation, and the difference between that and an administrative review and the use of force review, and then Mummy and the COB's role in all those? I mean, that's sort of the whole thing, but I mean,
right.
This is sort of the bread and butter administrative investigation, right? So I'm just not sure what the administrative review is.
Yeah, so the review in itself is us reviewing to see if their actions were within policy, because we know that this incident occurred. This is not a what if did it occur. We know that it occurred. So we're determining or not whether the use of force or the force that was used was within policy. So our use of force policy is presented. This is also goes along line with vehicle pursuit. Something that you guys learned about this past week is that you have to have certain reasons to pursue. Let's make sure that we're being mindful and observing due regards for safety in the midst of said pursuit. So while one of the things that we talked about is that, well, it doesn't say, oh, you can't do 20 miles over the speed limit in the midst of the pursuit with emergency equipment activated. However, is the question for us is, was that a good concept in the midst of considering safety, because you got tons of pedestrians around and it's, you know, in the middle of a school zone. In the
So do they get interwoven, like if there's a complaint revolving a chase, you know, one of the issues to investigate would be that policy. So, I mean, I'm not sure I understand the difference.
Okay, so let me try it this way. So say you're reviewing a use of force. And in the midst of the use of force review, you're just making sure that all the actions of the officers involved in that use of force fall within policy for those actions. So every use of force is being reviewed.
And so if there's, I get that, if there's no public complaint, you would do it anyway.
Yeah, we're doing
If
it.
there is a public complaint, how does that, I mean, is it just part of the investigation?
Right, so at that point,
Okay.
say one of the complainants would say, well, they put this person in a chokehold. However, we're now reviewing this use of force as an excessive force investigation, which would be handled by OPR as well. And because it's excessive force, the question is, did they in fact do a chokehold, period, right? That's really what we're seeing. So now we have a use of excessive use of force violation. So we're gonna review it again to ensure that it did not occur, but also, and I really chose the wrong concept in the midst of what I just said, because excessive force is also something, a complaint, we would also report to the Commonwealth Attorney, and she would have an opportunity to review the investigation as well if she saw fit.
So the administrative review is self-initiated?
Yes.
And if it would have happened as part of a public complaint, and the complaint comes in first, you just do them both together?
They would be separate. The citizen complaint would be separate from the
So
administrative.
separate paperwork and separate,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
So like another way of looking at it is like administrative review, right? Supervisor authorizes a pursuit well within policy, right? But the administrative review is conducted. Yes, I know that Captain Kim authorizes pursuit for a carjacked vehicle where the person shot at someone, right? Good to go. It falls within policy. But what we don't know is during that pursuit, were the officer's actions with due regard for safety, were they within policy? And that's what that administrative review is for, right? So it's a double layer of, even though we know the pursuit falls within our policy, are the actions of the officers during the pursuit within policy? And that's why we do that second layer, because we want to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable.
Okay, so do you don't get many public complaints that overlap with these kind of administrative reviews?
Not a lot, no, but I think the other part to what you're saying, if we see someone, and this was brought up this weekend, is we see identify an officer doesn't have a seatbelt on, and they're also on their phone texting someone at the same time, and they're in a vehicle pursuit. I'm really kind of going outlandish here. There are other violations, and that's going to be a separate investigation. That's not going to be something that's within policy that we investigate as well internally.
And what's Mummy and our role in an investigative review?
So for a use of force, according to the flow chart that was published, the use of force review would be conducted, and then Mummy would have an opportunity to review it. And the reason why it's not OPR is conducting the initial review is because that's done at a shift level. And all that's going to be done, we'll be notified that it happens, and then it comes up the chain. One thing that OPR does, which is different stuff from some other departments, and I think this is something that speaks to our responsibilities in this, is that OPR, nothing goes into our administrative investigation or administrative review system without an OPR review. So OPR personnel, though it may be a declaration that this is within policy that comes to us, even after the deputy chief reviews it, they are still going to review it again, because at that point, they are reviewing it on behalf of the chief to ensure it put the department stamp on it for those purposes. And if they see something that all those people in that chain, for whatever reason, missed, it will go right back down to start that process all over again to review for those circumstances. That is very rare, but one thing that we just saw and why you guys watched the video, some people heard what was said in that video and some people didn't. So some things are missed. We watch a lot of video. So, but that's the point of the checks and balances through the process of the chain of command and through OPR as being the final, keep going through those steps. We don't just let one person make that decision in the silo by themselves.
And then finally, so I'm sorry, if there's the last one is if there's death or serious bodily injury. So that goes, first has to be possibly go to the Commonwealth Attorney or SIR first.
SIR first, yes.
Right.
They will be conducting that investigation as a criminal investigation. And then secondly, FRISA or our Commonwealth Attorney at that time will be conducting their investigation and review of the finalized cert process. And then once all those different things are closed out, then there's administrative review. That administrative review in that sense, because ultimately those actions are a use of force. And so those are the policies initially for sure that we're evaluating administratively to make sure are in line or within policy.
And if there's some clear need to take administrative action up front, then you can do that.
Oh, absolutely.
And that review can also lead to training, identifying training deficiencies or anything of that nature too. And those are addressed as well.
And we have a procedure. If an officer's involved in a traumatic incident like that, I mean, they're automatically being put on administrative leave. And, as the process moves, there's eventually a screening to make sure they're ready to go back to work or they in a place where they're good to go back to work. So there's a very defined process to make sure that we're not putting somebody back to work until they're ready to be back to work.
Thanks.
On the investigation itself, are there any questions or concerns about some of the guidelines that we set forth or what we're actually looking at? Have anything? Albert?
I don't have
Any questions about this whatsoever? All right, well, that's gonna conclude for us. Right on the money.
Yeah.
All right.
I
Thank
have
you.
to say,
Thank
I'm like so beyond all the information that you guys have organized for us and mobilized in such a logical fashion and like very thorough and easy to follow. Like my notes, seeing back, everything you guys said, that you guys always ended exactly on time. I noticed it every single time. And I was like, if I could get the people in my industry to be this good at getting done with presentations, what they're supposed to be, whew, everyone would be happier. So we really appreciate
I
it.
just want to take a quick moment. I mean, this concludes 57 hours of training. And that is significant.
Yay, Martine.
Thanks, Martine. Appreciate that. So I want to highlight a little bit more from what Julie just said. I think that when we were going through the plan of getting us to a readiness, and by doing that, this opportunity to work on, to go through a fairly aggressive training curriculum for volunteers in a short amount of time, because we know that at any moment we need to be ready, and we expect to be ready. We're excited for that opportunity to be a part of the community and help the police department. And what I really appreciated is that this logical, thoughtful process, it would have been very hard to have to have gone through Saturday without all of the other context and background that the police department has been willing to share and go through with us to include today. It really does put more of the story of how the police department serves our community. So big thanks to you all for what you do. And it's not beyond me, as I've said many times, of how difficult your job is. I think one of my big takeaways is just that, I feel very safe in my community. However, what I've learned is how the effort that it takes to provide a safe and very secure community. And so big thanks. And it's been a privilege to go through all this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Especially thankful. I know from working with you so much time to see how much blood, sweat, and tears and time and just joy, really, that you put into designing this curriculum and executing it. I know that that was, the support of everyone at the department and all the trainers that we had an opportunity to learn from. Just really grateful. I want to acknowledge the amount of time and energy, and that we're lucky to have that because it's not happening every year.
I will say our staff, when I went to each one of them and asked them to participate, their excitement, because we are a department that absolutely loves training, receiving and sending out both ways. So they are very excited. They were very excited to work, and I think they enjoyed, especially Saturday. Just so you guys know, I think we enjoyed Saturday just as much as you guys did. So that's the reason why that went to the last second too, Julie. So sorry, I gave you, I think, 10 minutes back of your life, but that's about
We really appreciate it. And we've got a little portion after this, but we'll let you guys get about the rest of your evening. Thank you all so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Good seeing everyone again.
Yes.
Take care. Yeah.
See you soon.
We appreciate it. Absolutely. Our pleasure. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Depends on the side.
Don't forget your phone.
For sure. I'm also working on it.
Is it later
Don't forget your phone.
Oh, thank you so much.
Do you have a special answer for all your conference?
Good seeing you. Good seeing you.
I have like two secret dollars.
I was like, sorry.
You were fried.
I mean.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know what, I went back to the base to provide them, and she didn't have it.
Yeah.
She said she.
It's hard to administrate. I mean, if you have bigger people, don't really tell you. Nobody's in Congress are kind of longer too.
Yeah, they're definitely, yeah, so
Here it's all two cities,
yeah. And then they're not the,
Oh, trust me.
size. So,
I know.
yeah, so I think it's like almost
That is both sides.
size and a half.
You have to look at the top, you can't.
Then what my actual size?
Thank you.
These are.
Thanks for everything.
But I'm.
Yes.
Thanks very much. This was
great.
great.
Chief.
Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
I hope I don't try. I don't think I could have.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
This is the dumb phone.
We'll just do this really quickly. I think everyone has, well, we have some scheduled MOU walkthroughs with Mummy. Some need to be made up. So we'll get through those hopefully all before the February 8th meeting. And then we're going to kick off our subcommittee strategy for the year on February 8th. We're going to have an MOU subcommittee discussion. Everyone will need to be here in person to have that discussion so that we can sort of, February 8th is our next meeting. And we will hold that meeting here. We don't have the full agenda for it yet. I'm not sure exactly how much time we're gonna need, but we'll walk through the MOU and have discussion about that. And then for the February 22nd meeting, I think we will likely sort of return to our normal programming and talk about the other subcommittees that we want to have and what our priorities are for the rest of the year. So February 22nd will be our formal meeting. And we'll make sure you guys have agendas for both of those before then.
Do you have to be with that one in person or that could be virtual?
So for the February 22nd, it will be sort of pursuant to our electronics meeting policy. If you need to attend virtually, just let me know ahead of time. And then I'm hoping that at that February 22nd meeting, what we can do is have established, our priorities for, I know we've got training decisions to make for this year, outreach discussions that we want to kick off. We may have other subcommittees we want to form. I think, I'm not sure exactly whether or not we're going to want like a reporting subcommittee or if that will just be something that we work on jointly. But that's what we can discuss on the 22nd. And then everyone will have a calendar for which ones are, our official meetings and are going to be subject to our electronic meeting attendance policy, and which ones we can have be flexible. I did, Mummy, review the supplemental guidance, and the guidance for subcommittees is to attend as much as you can. So it's sort of separate from the other attendance, which is what we were hoping for, that we can get together in substantive groups, but not have it be so exhaustive on everyone's time. We don't all need to do training and outreach and the report. We can sort of divide and conquer a little bit, but I think it would be good to hear from everyone at the February 22nd meeting what your sort of interest is in those different areas. If somebody wants to take, leadership roles in those different areas, we can sort of build consensus about that. And
so there's a discussion about that on the 22nd, but you're going to initiate it on the 8th?
Yeah, we want to have the board and the public plenty of time to review the MOU. We really want the public comment period to be robust for that, so that if we get comments back and we need to address them, there's still time to do that.
So can we discuss the MOU on the 8th too, or is that,
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. That will be the discussion for,
Okay.
sorry, yeah, so the subcommittee discussions
Is actually
for the
22nd.
rest of the subcommittees will be on the 22nd.
Okay.
But just because, and the, time iterations of this are obviously a limiting factor, but we want to keep moving forward and then get about, I think February 22nd, we want to have an agenda for what does the rest of our year look like and what are our priorities and how do we want to kick off some of the rest of that work.
So then after that, there's just once a month meetings.
Yes, so our meeting policy technically is 11 meetings a year at a minimum. We do want to keep the option, depending on what issues arise, right? That like if we had an investigation and we needed more time to substantively discuss, certainly we're not going to say, well, we only have 11 meetings, so that's the requirement. But we do especially want to be conscious this year that we had a lot of time requirements. And so I don't think we're going to necessarily need 3-hour meetings for all of these time slots. And I just want to work through that together. So nobody feels like we're shortcutting anything that's, substantively important, but also that we don't, fill an agenda for the sake of filling an agenda.
Yeah, I don't think we're just cutting like these.
Like whatever the opposite is.
Meetings,
That's what
Certainly.
They're pretty lengthy, and it's like, gotta be aware of
Everyone's
time. And
Exactly.
like some of the, like, even, and I'm just gonna be honest, some of the trainings, I'm like, this could have been done in like 30 to 40 minutes. It's kind of being long-winded. Remember that for future.
So we will have a training subcommittee so that we can be, a little bit deliberate about what we want that to look like going forward and how we want to sort of maintain that compliance. I mean, a lot of it, like you said, was exhaustive, the opposite of shortcutting maybe, but now we have that foundation. I think it makes it really easy for us to steer our own ship.
But some of that is addressed in the
ordinance
too, and the ordinance. So
Right.
Absolutely.
It's something that
The ordinance actually says
Well, it's
it's
right.
100
So
hours or something.
right. So
It says
no.
8 hours of
It doesn't.
Mm-mm.
8 hours of NACOL, 3 ride-alongs.
Right.
We will definitely work within we will not shortcut the ordinance
Right.
specified provisions, but there
But
are
no,
some
right,
things
but
that
it's in
afford
there.
discretion, and
Right.
this curriculum was invaluable for giving us the insight, but
So I
probably
think-
don't need to do that every year.
I think it's, so so to the extent then that the MOU may further inform how much or how little we go beyond the, what we have to do in the ordinance, I think that's something to consider. consider. And also, I don't want to, I would say that some of the questions that you had about what we can and can't do and how that was based, I think some of them are up to interpretation. So I would advise everyone to look at what the PPG said.
Yeah.
Explicitly what was there, and understand that there was room for interpretation in that. And maybe we can't just take everything, that was said as coming down from Sinai. That there are other views there. And the other thing that I would, in addition to the PPG, I'll just end right there because I just had one say something. But I would just recommend that you look at that PPG and that guidance there, because I think that it's informative of how we may want to look at what we can do in the MOU, and part of it may be what we want to do now and what we can grow into. But then that's a conversation we can have at another time.
Yeah, so we should definitely raise all that and discuss it, no later than February 8th, but you think you're going to put off until March the goal of, because if we tried to do all that and the county's board is going to meet on the 18th of February, that's way too short.
That's an aggressive time.
Is the MOU, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk about that. Is the MOU necessary for us to get to review this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says it in the ordinance.
So then we look towards March.
The thing is, I mean,
Better, or
the way I've always thought about this is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah.
And although we don't want to spend months deliberating over every word of the MOU, we also don't want to rush through an MOU that we don't all feel pretty good about. So, yeah, I mean, we don't want to get ready to this resolution, but if we have to take another month, do it in March as opposed to February, I think that's a fair trade-off.
And I think that there may be some leeway within the ordinance that there are some parts of what we do that we can move forward in that may not necessarily be us as a COB. So to the extent that there may be opportunities for Mumi to begin her work, it depends on interpretation of what that ordinance there, but there may be some moves there so that it's not that everything is held up till to the MOU. But again, that's up to the board to decide how they want to look at that and then give me their opinions beyond that.
We will aggregate everyone's sort of preliminary inputs to the MOU and then sort of, so we can have an organized discussion on the 8th. Mami, did you want to, I was in that, certainly.
Yeah, sorry, I probably should have started the discussion to kind of just frame what the scenario is, and hopefully that will help kind of like organize all of the comments. So the initial goal was to try to get this before the county board at their February 18th meeting. If you recall, last time we kind of just took a brief synopsis of what that looks like in terms of internal deadlines to get there. As you can tell from some of the questions that we posed tonight in the discussion, and also the MOU draft that I shared with you all, I tried to flag some of the things that I think still need a lot of substantive discussion. And so in order to have those discussions internally, as well as with the other signatories to the MOU, and then also to invite meaningful public comment, I think that gets us beyond the February 18th date if we're being realistic. So I'm looking at the the March 18th date, which has very similar kind of deadlines, but the ones that, to kind of give you an idea of why we're looking at February 8th as a subcommittee meeting, that is, so to backtrack a little bit, we're doing the internal debriefs, right, in groups of 2 to give people an opportunity to give like specific feedback or ask specific questions. And then I'm going to compile all of that into the document that I shared with you all so you can all see who's made what comment, who has what questions and concerns, and we can use that as a framework for our collective collaborative dialogue. It's still important for us to all come together at the table and discuss all of these, any questions, concerns. So we have the advantage of like having shared understanding. And then from there, Julie and Gary will have the opportunity, one or the other or both, if they wanted to sit at the table at the discussions with the other stakeholders to try to get through some of these conversations around internal investigations and what role we have in the disciplinary process and how some of these things are going to work. And Charles, you hit the nail on the head earlier. Like there are some things when you're thinking about an MOU that you want to leave a little bit of flexibility so that we can determine how we should handle recurring training or annual requirements or whatever the case may be, or when they have to happen, because as you know, we talked about earlier, you might have different time periods where someone is, their term expires, and maybe we have a new COB member, or maybe someone resigns and we have a new COB member, and if we have too rigid of a structure, then we run into structural issues. But there are other things that we need to have really finely spelled out, because in the ordinance, we have ideas about what we want the oversight model to look. We have kind of directives, right? The MOU is designed to really spell out what those directives should look like, who should do what, how they should actually work into practice. But there is some differences in terms of what things should be spelled out, what things should not. So just keep that in mind as you're reviewing the MOU. And then, if you all have specific questions that we can answer in our internal debriefs, I'll be happy to answer those and flag them for more discussion and make the suggested edits in the document. And then I'll open it up after I've done the internal discussions for folks to go back in and just say hey, I thought about this further, or hey, I want to add this language, or maybe I didn't fully capture whatever your comment was, if you want to elaborate on it. And then, as I said, we can use that for our internal discussion. So that would happen on the 8th. After having that internal discussion, or while we're having those internal discussions and afterwards, is when we should be meeting with the internal stakeholders to collaboratively try to figure out an answer to some of the larger things that we're not fully aligned on yet. And then at that point, we want to open it up to the public. So hopefully somewhere in mid-February. So then at the meeting on the 22nd, one thing I just wanted to highlight is that would be an opportunity for the public to give comment. But we would make sure that the MOU is posted in time for folks in the public to read it and be able to give meaningful comment at the 22nd meeting. And then the time afterwards would be an opportunity for us to figure out if there are comments that require some changes in the draft, then we may need to huddle up in a subcommittee or an internal meeting, or maybe we get together in groups of two. We'll need to figure that out. But just wanting to make sure that there's a little bit of time there to make any adjustments as needed. And then once we're all on the same page there, that's when it goes through the process of going to the county attorney and the CMO, the county manager's office, in the form of reports, and then it gets distributed and posted publicly, and then it would go to the county board at their March 18th meeting. And then in terms of the readiness resolution, it is, as you all said, required for the readiness resolution. It does not necessarily mean that if there are investigations that come to ACPD in the meantime, that I couldn't, have those reports, be involved in the investigation, write a report, and then you all would have an opportunity to, opine on them and either agree or disagree. Once the readiness resolution is passed, you could still be doing your community engagement. 30 days, it sounds like a lot, but it will really fly by. But I also don't want to imply that I take it lightly at all, that you guys have done so much to get to this point, and it's we're right there at the finish line, but we do want to make sure we do it right. And especially with the MOU, with some of these larger topics that there is a lot of discussion to be had around. We're not going to get it perfect because there's going to be some trial and error here, but we are going to try as much as possible to get it as close as we can, relying on feedback that we've gotten from the community, feedback that we've shared with one another, and relying on experiences that I've had with Oversight and being able to say, well, this is typical of industry standard, this is not typical of industry standard, and hopefully I can serve as professional opinion in highlighting some of those things and answering your questions in those ways. So that's my spiel as far as the MOU. If y'all have any questions now, I'm happy to take those, or we can have those discussions in our internal debrief or at our collective.
And I'll set up an appointment here before we leave. When I get
Yes, you're delinquent. I'm just kidding. I can tell that you've read it, so I'm sure you have a lot of really great questions.
So, yeah, we'll set that up.
Well, acknowledging both your question about the internal, external complaints and the ambiguity and them saying actually it says public, which in my head, but I think that we will likely need to update these things over time. Like you said, getting started and being authorized to do the work that we're supposed to do is much more important than we won't be able to think everything through. So I think probably, one of my priorities for the subcommittees is a policy subcommittee that we can talk about from everything we've done, from our ride-alongs, from our experience, in training, from our interactions with each other, at the beginning of the year, what because just like they inform all of their policy changes with best practice, when we want to recommend changes or we want to recommend things for consideration, we're going to want to have some, additional resources and research and stuff to sort of support that. And I think that we'll have lots of good opportunity to do that in the vein of some of the questions that we had. So, we'll certainly send,
So sorry, one more thing.
Not a problem.
In the vein of readiness resolution, of course, today we completed our last required ACPD training. That being said, there are a few online trainings or just different little, some of those smaller modules that a couple of people are missing. So Ian just put together a little quick bullet point list to tell people exactly which ones to go in and look for. Because I know when you open the Learning Center training list, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see what's what because it's just it's all these drop down menus. So they're not many, but just to make sure that maybe you might have started it and just didn't get to the end where you hit complete, just making sure that those are all checked off, because in putting together our readiness resolution packet, I want to be able to certify that you all have completed all of your trainings.
Those and our bios.
Oh, yes.
We'll treat those as due by February 8th. So Ian will let you know which ones you're missing, and I'll get our bios into Ian before then, because still figuring out the photography, but until we do, we can get the bios posted. And
How long is that? Like a paragraph?
3 sentences.
3 sentences.
I would say no more than a page. Depends on. I've seen a couple of people that had a couple paragraphs. Some people that just had one. It's totally up to you, but just no more than a page.
And I told Mommy last night, if you don't send me anything, I'm going to list that you graduated from Hamburger University. And that you have been experienced.
A drag queen in Brazil.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Any additional business?
Just what about MOU? Have any put in a provision that mandates the review in 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, we talked about that. I think the recommendation might be annually, at least at the onset, and then maybe we might go to every 2 years.
Okay.
It's not often that MOUs get reviewed.
Right.
Like I know the one in New Orleans they're just now in the process of reviewing, and it's about 10 years old.
Right.
But just because of the fact that we are a new entity and there's a lot of kinks that we're going to need to work out, we probably want to have an initial review at the 1 year mark, just to say, that we want to or that we don't want to. It's not required that,
right.
that we change it, but just a review at least.
Additional business? Hearing none, I declare the meeting adjourned.
All right. Excellent.
Thanks, y'all.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Martine.
Bye, Martine.
Bye, everyone. I'll see you at the next meeting.
So Martina's not here, but I do have lists for some. Gary's also not here. So, I know. So these ACP